Mr. Michael Pregent and Mr. Bijan Kian for accepting my invitation to an hour discussion surrounding one of the pressing issue regarding Iran. Thank you so much. I'd like to tell those of Iranian American and Iranian also inside Iran that who don't know Mr. Michael Pregent, he's got quite a precise point of view on politics, and he's among those few Americans who know Islamic Republic pretty well. Michael Pregent is a senior fellow at Hudson Institute. He's a senior Middle East analyst, and he is a former intelligence officer with over 20 years experience. And about Mr. Bijan Kian, a lot of Iranians, you know Mr. Kian, former senior officer and national security professional who has worked for 3 consecutive administrations, reporting directly to 2 presidents of the United States. He was last position deputy lead for the Office of Director of National Intelligence at the United States. Thank you so much for both guests. I wanted to talk about Iran, talk about Iran today and Islamic Republic. This rogue, rebellious terrorist regime has turned 43 years, and despite all the efforts and sacrifices people inside Iran have made to transition from this oppressive regime. Iranians have not yet succeeded in achieving their final demand of freedom. Why? I'm asking all because till this very day Iranians have stood up against Islamic Republic regime, from protests to uprisings. Thousands of brave freedom-seeking Iranians have been killed or imprisoned until now. Then what the problems? How come Islamic Republic is still in power until now? And what are the strengths and weaknesses of the Islamic republics? What are the strengths and weaknesses of the Iranian people? And a lot of other questions about this issue. Let me start the first question with Mr. Bijan Kian. Mr. Kian, why do you think Islamic Republic has survived until now, today?
Regent and I are both working at the Institute for Voices of Liberty, and we're delighted to be with you, Ali. I'd like to turn the question to Mike Regent to answer your question first, and then I'll add my comments to you, if that's okay with you.
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Pregent. What do you think? Why do you think Islamic Republic has survived until now?
I don't think Mike.
I think Mr. Pregent cannot hear us.
Yeah, I cannot hear you. If you could please correct that technical issue. I'd like him to answer the question first, and then I will share my views.
Okay, please, you can go ahead, please, Mr. Kian. Keep going until Mr. Pregent will fix the problem.
Yeah, I'll be happy to share with you my own thoughts as to why the Islamic Republic has remained in power despite the fact 42 years.
Somebody want to tell me something?
Now, Mr. Pregent, maybe you called Mr. Kian. We have some problem with a technical problem. Now we can hear you.
I can't hear anything. I hear nothing. No one said a word to me.
You cannot hear now?
Thank you.
Still? Mr. President, you cannot hear us?
The Regent cannot hear you. There is a technical issue for the broadcast. If you don't mind, if you could please correct that problem, and Mr. Regent can hear you. And I'm happy to talk while you're doing that, if that's okay.
Okay, you can keep going, Mr. Kian.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mr. Kian. We can hear you. Please go ahead. Mr. Kian? Mr. Kian, we have no problem with your voices. We can hear you. Mr. President, do you hear me?
Mr. Jalal Mahdi, I lost the sound altogether.
Okay, let me call you again. Let me call you again.
Okay, I can hear it now. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you right now. Can you hear me, Mr. President?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, Mr. President, I had a question for you after Mr. Kian. I asked, why do you think Islamic Republic has survived until now?
Now, Mr. Jalal Mahdi, I cannot hear you at all. So,
Are we live
could you
right now, or are we
reconnect
just?
me, please?
We are live right now. Hold on, let me, now we
Yeah.
have problem with
Okay.
Mr. Kian.
Sure.
Mr. Kian, we can hear you. I can hear you very well. Everything's okay on the broadcast. We have no problem with the both guests. Go ahead, Mr. President.
Okay,
Please.
so thanks for having me. This is a new format for me. Thank you. The regime is still alive today because the United States and Europe keep giving it a lifeline. The Biden administration is doing everything it can to keep this regime afloat. Maximum pressure made it even difficult for China to keep Iran afloat. But the reason the regime survives today is because it continues to use a playbook of provocations for concessions. And Europe and the United States, under Democrat presidents, continue to give it a financial lifeline.
Okay. Mr. President, I wanted to know, there is a lot of question about that after 43 years, people of Iran tried to make a freedom in Iran. They couldn't. You think what's the weakness for Iranian regime? You think what are the strengths and weaknesses of the Islamic Republic?
So the Islamic Republic of Iran does not own Iran's history. So that's a weakness. It doesn't own Iran's rich history. The Iranian people do. And the Iranian people now, with the protests that have taken place since 2018, continue to spread in other areas. So the regime is very weak. It lacks legitimacy inside of Iran. The problem is the international community continues to give this regime legitimacy. There is no other regime in the world that can seize oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, attack ships in the Gulf of Oman, conduct terrorist strikes across the Middle East, and get away with it. North Korea couldn't do what Iran does. Russia couldn't do what Iran does, or China. But the United States and the international community continue to reward Iran for its provocations instead of punishing it for its violations of international law. So its strength is support from the West. Its weakness is support from the Iranian people. And we've seen that with the lowest turnout of any recent election under Raisi's supposed victory in the last election.
Mr. President, one of the difficulties that Iranian people are facing, lack of a strong nation television for communication. You know, this is very important for
Yes.
Iran because Iranian regime has very hard censorship. The present television are enjoying the support of various governments, and in the name of professionalism, they do not allow important subjects by through experts to discuss and give time to the people who support the regime and ignore the freedom of expression from people and fill other subjects in the name of freedom of expression. My question is, how can Iranian people fill the gap for expression of freedom?
You know, this is one of the most disappointing responses by the international community I think we've seen in recent history. If the international media cared about the protests in Iran, that would collapse the regime. If personalities like Anderson Cooper actually spent time in Tehran, like he did during the protests in Egypt in Tahrir Square, that would collapse the regime. Pressure on this regime by the international community is non-existent, unfortunately. What is needed is for the Iranian people to have access to the internet, for the international community and neighboring countries to provide internet to the protesters and allow them to use the same social media platforms that the regime uses to talk to the West, to push out propaganda. And this could be, easily set up if the United States, if other countries did this. And we saw a post today of the new British ambassador to Tehran, very excited about his new post in Tehran. But where is the UK's demands that the Iranian people have access to the internet, that the protesters not be targeted and killed by the Basij and other forces inside of Iran? The international community is blind, or it is not blind. They see what's happening, but they want to keep the message from the Iranian people from getting out of Iran, and that's a big problem. The West should be very interested in putting down this regime by simply putting a spotlight on its actions.
Very good. You think the media has double standard about Iran, double standard?
Absolutely. If North Korea did this, the international community would condemn it. If North Korea seized an oil tanker, or if North Korea conducted an attack against a civilian ship, if China did that, the international community would condemn it. If Russia did it, the international community would condemn it. But Iran, for some reason, gets a pass. I don't understand it. I think there's the romanticism that Europe has with Iran, with the Islamic Republic of Iran. They believe that it somehow has the support of its people. That romanticism is displaced. What the Europeans are actually romanticizing is the Iranian people, and they've conflated that with the regime, and that is embarrassing. That should be ridiculed by the rest of the world. The Islamic Republic of Iran does not represent its people. The Islamic Republic of Iran does not have the support of its people, and yet it continues to get the support of Europe and the United States. And absolutely there is a double standard when it comes to the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Exactly. One of the difficulties that Iranian people facing, I told you this is about media, but another thing is how the public opinion in the Western world thinks of the truth about Iran. The lobby of Islamic Republic is always trying hard to explain the crimes and terrorism of the Islamic Republic in a different way to both domestic and international audiences. In your opinion, how can the Iranian people and Iranian outside of the country tell the truth on Iranian situation, for example, in the United States?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest problems in this whole conversation is the lack of voices coming from Iranian, the diaspora. Uh, the U.S. press listens to NIAC, the national. Um, well, I don't even know what it's called. Let's ignore NIAC. But the there are no voices that the media is listening to outside of the ones that come from NIAC and the Quincy Institute. So basically, any place that Trita Parsi has touched. And prior to Obama, Democrats and Republicans were both against the Islamic Republic of Iran, but Obama managed to wrap the country in his arms. And any time the Democrats criticize Iran, they withhold that judgment because they don't want to insult Obama. And we need to
Exactly.
divorce that relationship. I have no idea why Democrats believe that insulting Tehran is insulting Obama. It is again another embarrassing, naive position that Democrats hold on this regime.
We have no idea too, Mr. President. Mr. President, you have experiences of 3 wars for the United States. The youth in Iran asking us how, without military support from the United States or another foreign countries, can we face the Islamic Republic? My question is, or in your opinion, please tell me, U.S. war or Israeli war with Islamic Republic is serious, is real?
I believe we're already at war with Iran. This is what war with Iran looks like. Again, a series of provocations, a series of attacks, and they always ask for money in return. What I find interesting is Raisi says, we will ensure that the Strait of Hormuz is safe from us, meaning the threat in the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman is from the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Navy. And it's extortion. It's extortion. So this is what war with Iran looks like. There will not be an invasion of Iran. The United States will never invade another country like they did Iraq and Afghanistan. The American people have no appetite for these failed strategies of forever wars. But war with Iran could be as simple as maximum pressure, a media spotlight on the protests in Iran, a demand from Western governments that the regime step down, uh, sanctioning China and Russia for supporting the regime. And I think the Iranian people, I've heard this from the diaspora, that they're okay with targeting the IRGC. They're okay with targeting the regime. And,
Exactly.
and I think that could take place. We really have to look at the regime's threats. It's Lebanese Hezbollah, it's Hamas, it's Islamic Jihad, and they threaten to attack Israel, they threaten to attack Saudi Arabia, they threaten to fracture the Middle East, and that's what they use. They will fight to the last Arab. They will fight to the last Arab, but I think Nasrallah has been shown the targets on his properties. The Israeli Defense Forces say, Nasrallah, if you attack Israel, this is what gets attacked. This is what you lose. And this has proven out as a good strategy to deter Lebanese Hezbollah from following Iran's guidance in destroying Israel, because they can't do it without being destroyed themselves. Uh, this is what war with Iran looks like. And the only thing keeping Iran afloat is the United States. The United States, this administration is lifting sanctions. This administration is not holding China and Russia accountable for skirting sanctions against Iran. And we need to remember that a $20 trillion economy like the United States could put immense pressure on Russia, can put immense pressure on Iran. And the international community should hold China responsible for all of its actions, to include unleashing the virus on the international community and the world.
Very good. Islamic Republic have created, we'll talk about that, created disturbances throughout the Middle East, all Middle East country, yeah, a lot of them, the region by interfering in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Yemen, also in Syria, and even in Persian Gulf region. Now, regime actively supports the Taliban group in Afghanistan to defeat, you know, that the regime supported by the US. Many people in Iran assume strategy has caused the regime for long life. From this point of view, lack of strategy has caused an increase in trade arms by Western countries to Middle East countries, selling arms to Middle East countries and gaining great financial profit by Western companies. For this reason, Western countries are not eager to overthrow the Islamic Republic and prefer to stay this regime. In your opinion, why the Western countries, not all of them, you know I'm talking about what, Western countries are not supporting Iranian people for change, for regime change?
Yeah, the West believes that regime change will result in Iraq. Regime change will result in Libya. So they're very worried about collapsing something.
Not
To
regime
include,
change, I mean not regime change by attacking Islamic Republic, by helping Iranian people.
yeah, yeah. If you help the Iranian
Go
people, it
ahead.
collapses the regime. I mean, that's what we're really talking about here. Is the they don't want to help the Iranian people because they don't want to collapse the regime. If the regime collapses, they believe it will look like Syria, it will look like Libya, it will look like Iraq. It will basically be a mistake. And they always have the straw man argument that what if something more dangerous follows the regime? And this argument, I think, is flawed in many ways because you're letting people suffer because you're afraid of what could come after something bad like the regime. And that is an excuse for inaction, and that is a self-imposed obstacle for success. Um, the international community needs to turn on the internet, allow Iranians to get the videos out of the regime suppressing the protest, and we need Western media inside of Tehran demanding that the regime stop. That would collapse the regime. We don't, it's not going to be done militarily. It always is done when the international community says enough, puts a spotlight on it, and especially when the protesters are being, civilians are being killed by the security forces. This should get the international community to respond. But unfortunately, Syria is an example of inaction. 600,000 Syrians died because the international community was worried about what would come after Assad. And the regime is using this as an example of how to survive.
But you don't think Syria, for example, Syria situation now a kind of consequence of Iranian interfering to Syria? Iran,
Absolutely.
Iran, Iran did it actually.
Yes,
That's why it
absolutely.
may be different story if regime change in Iran will happen. All region, all Middle East will change.
Yeah, I mean, behind every problem in the Middle East is Iran. You know, if you look at Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, what they're trying to do in Bahrain, what they're trying to do in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, what they're doing in the Strait of Hormuz, the Gulf of Oman, attacking Israel, attacking America. Absolutely. If the regime falls, the Middle East would be better off, especially those countries that are affected by Iran. But what replaces that is the question. and hopefully it's the Iranian people deciding to have an inclusive, secular democratic government. Uh, and of course, we'd have to have reconciliation and amnesty for the lower ranking members of the Revolutionary Guard, and those types of activities. Um, the problem is, like you said, I mean, Iran fractured Syria, it has fractured Iraq, it has fractured Lebanon, it has fractured uh, Yemen, and the Iranian people say the enemy is not outside of Iran, it's inside of Iran. It is the regime. That is the problem. And they are alone, unfortunately, in this criticism of the regime.
Exactly. Mr. President, you have a lot of experience. One of the weaknesses points of the Islamic Republic is the fear of regime to know the truth. People know the truth. They're afraid of this. Regime has many channels and continues misleading people with lies and misinformation. We talk about this. I just remember this question that you think is just social media alone, capable of matching the regime's propaganda?
Well, the regime uses Twitter, the regime uses Facebook, and then denies that to the Iranian people. Uh, I think,
People ask me why Twitter let them to be active in the Twitter. This is social media from democratic
yeah,
atmosphere.
it's
Why?
basically, well, I mean, it's big tech in the U.S. is pro Obama administration, pro Biden administration, and they are reaching out to the regime and they want to go back into the nuclear deal. So they have a view of Iran that is different. You have the supreme leader has a Twitter account. The Qasem Soleimani had a Twitter account. It's crazy. Um, you didn't let Baghdadi have a Twitter account, but you let Qasem Soleimani have a Twitter account. It doesn't make any sense. It's an embarrassment that big tech and unfortunately Western governments continue to give this archaic, backwards-looking regime status and some sort of legitimacy. Uh, Again, turn on the internet, get the information out, and demand that the international community pay attention to what's going on. I, we saw what happened with Mubarak when Mubarak was asked to step down in Egypt. You had Anderson Cooper in the middle of Tahrir Square talking to protesters, getting assaulted by the Muslim Brotherhood,
I
being
remember that.
attacked by these people. Yet that was enough with Obama and the media to say, Mubarak, you have to step down. Why can't they do that with Tehran? Why can't they do that in Baghdad? Why can't they do that in Lebanon, in Beirut? Why won't they do that in Damascus? And it's because those countries lean towards the Islamic Republic, and Obama wrapped himself around it. The regime is protected by this. I truly believe this because I've heard it in DC all the time. Democrats are pro-Islamic Republic of Iran, and the only reason for that is President Obama.
Exactly, unfortunately. Mr. President, unfortunately, until now, we don't have Mr. Kian. We lost contact with Mr. Bijan Kian. I'm so sorry about that.
Right. No, it's
To you
okay.
and to our audiences, more than 8,500 people are watching us right now online. My next question is, many of youth in Iran, they are talking about leadership for opposition, and they
Right.
telling us that a lack of a united opposition means that the people in Iran have no specific plan to defeat the Islamic Republic, and the future of Iran is uncertain. What do you think? We need, Iranian people need leadership. What's the solution if we don't have it?
Yeah, that's the biggest problem is leadership inside of the country gets targeted, gets identified by the regime. The United States is in search of Guaidos, like in Venezuela, for example. We have an opposition leader, Guaido. We don't have that leader in Iran. Why? Because he's probably in Evin prison, or she's probably in Evin prison. Because when the regime identifies charismatic opposition leaders, they marginalize them and target them. Outside of Iran, we have many different groups that say that they have the support of the Iranian people, but they don't get along. And that's one of the biggest problems I see as an American, is when we engage these different groups, they don't like any other group that pops up, or any other leader. So, you have the Pahlavis, you have the women that have been put in jail because of the hijab, and then you have other groups, and nobody wants to say that we have to have an umbrella, that we need an umbrella opposition group to replace the regime. It needs to be organic, it needs to be from inside Iran, it needs to have the support of the Iranian people, and as soon as the regime identifies anyone that fits that signature, they target them, and they marginalize them, or they bring them up on charges. There have been two groups of IRGC officers, 150 each, over the last 18 months that have been arrested for conspiracy to overthrow the regime. And that's the type of messages that needs to get out of Iran and into the international communities, onto the international community's radar. There are opportunities, there are schisms inside of Iran that if we simply put a spotlight, a media spotlight on it, we'd be able to understand what we should do next.
Very good. I had this question actually. What's the strength and weaknesses of the Islamic Republic? You think what the weaknesses of the Iranian people?
Can you say that again? The last part. I'm sorry.
I want to say Iranian people has struggled against this regime for decades, but they didn't have freedom. You think what the strengths and weaknesses of the people, Iranian people, among regime?
Yeah, I mean, the regime has the ability to go after charismatic leaders. That's their strength. Their weakness is they're very unpopular. The people's strength is they are opposed to the regime. Their weakness is they can't get behind a leader. So that's the dynamic. And there are groups here in the United States, to include Bijan's group, the Voices of Liberty, the Institute for the Voices of Liberty, they're looking at the Iranian Constitution, that are looking at potential leaders that could form an opposition government if the regime collapses, that definitely have the support of the Iranian people. Again, it's a very dangerous situation. If you're inside Iran, if you're charismatic and you look like you're a leader of the opposition, you will likely find yourself in Evin prison or disappeared.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you for accepting my invitation.
No, thank you.
Mr. Michael Pregent was with us. Mr. Pregent, Senior Fellow at Hudson Institute. He is a Senior Middle East Analyst, and he is a former intelligence officer with over 20 years experience. Thank you so much for being with us. I try to have Mr. Kian in second part of the interview.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.